congressman for Minnesota's 1st District for 12 years, and now sharing his thoughts with us on the Al Travis Show. It's Congressman Gil Gutknecht.
Love having him on. Congressman, I'm going to be honest with you. In the last 2 weeks, since last time you were on, I will bet you 5 times in that 2 weeks, I thought when something hit the news, wonder what Congressman Gutknecht would say about that. Do you care if I start calling you on a regular, just you and I chatting? Because I think about you all the time and what you're going to say. Thanks for coming on the show.
Well, you can call. I may not answer,
Okay.
but
It's just, you see. Go ahead.
You have my number.
Well, and I do, but I don't try to misuse it. But what's just funny about it, I sit there and I watch something on the news. I'm like, I wonder what Gutknecht would say about that, or what do you say about that? I get to talk to you every 2 weeks, so I don't know what the rest of your friends do. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on around the world today. And I think before I push you on pause, you called it truth and consequences. Your thoughts on truth and consequences in the world today?
Well, yeah, I think there's so many stories, both here in the United States and around the world, that, some of the people who are listening to us this morning are old enough to remember a television show called Truth or Consequences.
Yep.
And I read the story this morning about Trump and President Trump suing the BBC. And he's suing him for $10 billion. Now, whether or not he'll get $10 billion,
yeah.
I think that's an open question. But the bottom line is, the BBC is on the line because they clearly distorted the truth about what happened and what President said on January 6th. And that's just a great example where if you don't tell the truth, ultimately there can be consequences. And then there's another story today, and it has been in the story in the news for several weeks now, about Senator Kelly and the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, calls the seditious six. And the whole idea that you can, publicly undermine the authority of the chain of command in the military,
yeah.
That is not a closely guarded secret. I think Senator Kelly knew exactly what he was doing, and now he's under very formal investigation and may ultimately face a court-martial from the United States military. So there are consequences when you do things that are not true. One of my favorite politicians that I served with when I was in Congress was Senator Phil Gramm of Texas. And he had a beautiful way of saying it. He said, if you say something that's not true, but you don't know it's not true, that's a mistake.
Yeah.
But when you say something that's not true and you know it's not true, that's a lie. And there are consequences for lies. And you look at what's happened, for example, in Australia with this, I guess they call it Bondi beach attack,
yeah.
Where so many Jewish Australians were just slaughtered in this terrorist attack. I mean, there's several stories there that I think when you get down to the truth, the story is incredibly ugly. And then for the Prime Minister to say the answer is more gun control, when we now know that the police stood by for 20 minutes
yeah.
while this attack was going on, while the terrorist reloaded. Yeah. And in fact, the episode was actually brought to an end, as so many of these are, where a bad guy is taken down by a good guy with a gun. Yeah. That's what happened. And so the truth is so powerful, and yet we have political figures who want to hide behind this idea that if we just try to disarm the good guys, that everything will be fine. And it took a long time for them. Well, and maybe, I shouldn't say all the media missed this, but it isn't the fact that they missed it. So many of these attacks, once you scrape off the very thin veneer, you realize they're much more related to militant Islam than anything else. And that's another thing where truth ultimately does wear away these lies and if you want to call them mistakes. I mean, the bottom line is that virtually all of the terror attacks in the world are happening as a result of militant Islam. And a lot of our political figures, Germany, for example, has almost had to cancel a lot of their their famous Christmas market displays and demonstrations because of the fear of Islamic attacks. I mean, and for politicians in Germany or in Europe or wherever who pretend that this isn't true, ultimately, there are consequences, and some of those consequences are very, very bad consequences for law-abiding, good people who just want to go to the Christmas markets in Germany, for example. And then you come home to Minnesota, and I'm sorry I'm going on a little long.
No, please.
But this story of Somali fraud and the whole idea that, well, they contribute a lot to our society. Well, a report came out this week which demonstrates who's pulling the wagon and who's been riding in the wagon. And the numbers are stark, and they're scary in some respects. And that is that so many of these people who have been living here for more than 10 years, number one, still declare that they're not proficient in English, and now have been on welfare benefits. Something like 90% of the families who have been here at least 10 years in the state of Minnesota are still on some form of public assistance. And let me just go back and talk about, again, telling the truth, and let's be honest about how this all happened. It has been the law. It is still federal law since 1887. I believe I'm correct on the date. But I remember almost the exact language, that you cannot be an immigrant and come to the United States and become a, quote, ward of the state. In other words, you cannot go on welfare benefits if you have come to this country as an immigrant. You have to have a sponsor, and that sponsor has to take responsibility to make certain that you get on your feet, find a job, and become self-proficient.
Well, let's go with that just real quick if we can, because I also read that about you had to have a sponsor to come in here, and that sponsor pledged that they would take care of you financially and you would not become a ward of the state. Well, like you say, that was in the 90s, so we're 30-some years later, and 80-some, 90% of these folks are still on welfare. When do we go back to the sponsors on that? Say, pony up.
Well, no, here's what happened, and this is where I want to get to the truth about it.
Okay.
The truth about it are twofold, and they both end with a president named Bush. Okay? I mean, let's be honest. It was George W. Bush. Some will remember his 1,000 points of light.
Yes.
Okay, that's the first thing, the first clue here. The 1,000 points of light were really about giving federal money to non-government organizations, NGOs. All right?
Okay.
Now, those NGOs quickly morphed into organizations. And then the second thing that George Herbert Walker Bush did was that he had the laws relating to people who fled countries because of civil war or some other rationale that where they couldn't feel safe. They could waive that 1887 law, and you combine that with the NGOs who got paid to resettle these immigrants. That's how this whole flood began. And then, on top of that, another Bush by the name of George W. Bush was the one who really opened the floodgates of Somalis to come into the country, and never thinking about or never really caring about what would happen with chain migration. And so now we have all of these people who have come into the country, who can't speak the language, who have no marketable skills, who have apparently very little interest in education, but they do understand this, and that is that the government is a cow to be milked. And, when the cow starts giving lots of milk, especially from a program that was sponsored by their representative, Ilhan Omar, the Feeding the Future, that was a bill that she sponsored.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden you've got the floodgates of money coming in, and they figure, let's get more hands out there milking this cow. And so the facts, I think, are pretty stubborn things in all of this. And frankly, I think, there are Republicans who have their hands on this as well as Democrats. But how do we get out of this problem? I think that's an open question. But the first stop, and I congratulate President Trump, because, the old rule is when you're in a hole, stop digging. And he has limited the ability of people, not just from Somalia, but from any of these third world countries, for applying to get into this country and then quickly signing up with NGOs to get free benefits from Uncle Sugar.
Yeah. I've got to go to break, but just to get on this Feeding Our Futures quickly on our way out, and your quick response. In 2020, this is the graph that I've just found. 2020 payments for Feeding Our Futures in Minnesota was $4.8 million. Just around at $5 million. 1 year later, now 2020, we're doing the COVID thing, right? We understand the COVID thing's going on. We're going to feed the children because they weren't going to school. This was going to be a couple, 3 weeks. It ended up being a couple of months, but then we're back to school. In 2021, a year after that, it was $143 million, a 2,800% spike as we're getting out of COVID, but the Feeding Our Futures money went up. Sir, in my house, my wife pays the bills and I balance a checkbook every month. If we had a bill that was $5 and the next month it was $2,800, my wife and I would have a conversation. What happened? The heat utility. How did this happen? How many people can be culpable in an idea where in 2020 we're at 5 million, in 2021 we're at 140? There had been the guy writing the check, the guy who's, at Human Services, who's in charge of Feeding Our Futures, the person in charge of all of Human Services. You'd already the lieutenant governor and the governor, the commissioners. Is there any holding anybody accountable to this? Are there any consequences in it? Maybe they weren't lying about it, but they looked the other way. You can't have that spike in a year and not know it.
Well, there's no question. I mean, if you were a CEO of a company and there was that much fraud going on inside your company, I think the board of directors would probably look for a different CEO. And that may be the consequences here in the state of Minnesota. I don't know. After the break, we'll come back and talk about what may be going on right now with the investigations.
All right. We'll do that. We've got him, Congressman Gil Gutknecht, on the Al Travis Show.
Think about it. A famous politician once said, "You're entitled to your opinion, but you are not entitled to your own facts." But in a world full of AI and fake news, where can Minnesotans find the facts? Center of the American Experiment is Minnesota's go-to source for fact-based analysis and common sense solutions for taxes, energy, public safety, and our kids' education. Visit AmericanExperiment.org for more information. Think About It is brought to you by Center of the American Experiment, Minnesota's think tank.
You need a friend at the Capitol who knows how to get things done.
And you're in luck, because that's exactly who we are, your friends at the Capitol, and we deliver results.
At Momentum Advocacy, we bring decades of experience in lobbying, public affairs, and crisis communications.
From local nonprofits to national corporations, we help you move policy, manage your media, and make your voice heard.
We're not just seasoned pros, we're essential partners.
Momentum Advocacy, your friends at the Capitol. Learn more at momentum-advocacy.com.
don't need to ask him his opinion more than once. Al Travis on The Al Travis Show.
And we've got him, Congressman Gil Gutknecht, on the program with us. We're talking about truth and consequences, and the truth is it's hard to imagine anybody that worked for the state of Minnesota in these departments did not have the idea that something was going wrong. But are there consequences to it? I kind of get you and vote the governor out if you don't want him as your governor anymore. Doesn't seem like a harsh enough penalty, if you will. But how far down does that go, Congressman? Where does someone get consequences if you work for the government?
Well, that's a great question. You know, one of the best jobs you can have if you want job security is to work for a government agency. All right. So what will happen to those people, we don't know. But let's talk about what I think is happening as we speak. And that is that there is a team of federal investigators that are, going through all the documents, all the emails right now to try and figure out, okay, who knew what and when, and what did they do about it, and what the consequences for their actions and or inaction. I think that remains to be seen. But I think the most important thing, and this is where I think sunlight comes in, if you really want to have consequences, if you really want to have people held accountable, the single most important thing is get the facts out there where the American people can, make their own judgments. And in some respects, that may be the harshest judgment that a lot of these people are going to have. Because once we begin to learn who knew what and when and what they did about it, even their neighbors, I think, are going to shun them because they're going to say, oh, my gosh, you allowed, them to take all of this money and you knew it was going on and you sent emails, telling your superiors and they did nothing and you did nothing. I don't know how this all washes out in the end, but I do think it's important to get to the facts. And the facts, I think, are going to be more damning than we can even imagine today because you're right. You don't have this much money going out the door without somebody raising questions. Mm-hmm. And more importantly, even within the Somali community, they're a very, very tightly, knit community. Mm-hmm. When you've got $1 billion sloshing around through the economy, when you've got lots of people who are allowing their kids to be signed up for various government programs so that don't need those programs, you got to have to, there's a certain amount of culpability within the community itself for not, being whistleblowers. Mm-hmm. And maybe they did this out of fear because, the truth of the matter is, as we begin to, see more of the facts, the Somali community is a little like, a community that's run by the mob. And as a result, they live in a certain amount of fear as it relates to, what do they say and when do they say it and who they say it to. And so, keep it in the family, keep it together, and hopefully we'll all be okay. Well, they're not going to be all okay because a lot of regular Minnesotans and Americans, frankly, wherever you go in the United States, this whole story is front page. Yeah. It may not be on the front page of the paper, but it's certainly at the water cooler and coffee shops. People are talking about this not only in Minnesota but around the country, and they are furious. As we think it's our money, it's federal money as well. The federal government was sending it. Everyone in the country has a right to be upset if Minnesota was handing this money out. Right, and more importantly, we wonder why affordability is an issue. We wonder why we had inflation. Well, consider this. Think about the trillions of dollars that were just thrown out the windows during COVID. Yeah. Ultimately, that was money that we didn't have. And so one way or another, that has been one of the most important triggers for the inflation that we experienced. So we're all paying the price for all of this fraud and mismanagement. And it happened at the state level, it happened at the local level, and frankly, it happened at the federal level. Government in general, the whole idea that they can be, we can all be wards of the state and that we can literally shut down the economy. That was such a dangerous idea, and we're all paying the price for it. Sir, I appreciate you. I appreciate taking time to come on with me when you got other things going on. Thanks for being here today. I'm completely out of time. Love having you on, and I'll think about you at least 5 more times between now and next time I see you. All right. See you soon. Congressman Gil Gutknecht on The Al Travis Show.
This season, bring the whole family to see Irving Berlin's